The worst moment of my life didn't come with sirens or gunshots. It came with a zippered suitcase and an extra toothbrush in the guest bathroom. You ever get that gut feeling before your world unravels? Mine started with a laugh, hers. Not the sweet, crinkly-eyed chuckle I married, but a high, breathy giggle meant for someone who wasn't me. I stood on the balcony of our mountain rental, mug of black coffee in hand, staring out at the pines. The air was crisp, too crisp for the hot shame burning under my skin. I'd heard it through the cracked window just moments ago. Her laugh. His voice. Low. Confident. Familiar. It was our third day of the vacation, but the first where the truth finally slithered in and made itself at home. My wife, Clara, had invited him. Not him as in her cousin or friend from high school. Him, as in Jake, the coworker she always said was like a brother. Funny. I don't hug my brother that long or laugh like I'm 12 drinks deep at his jokes. You know what's worse than being cheated on? Being cheated on when you're paying for the cabin. I should have known something was off the moment we arrived. She clung to her phone like it was oxygen, disappearing to take calls or send urgent work texts. Jake showed up that evening, unannounced, or so she claimed. Said he was in the area and thought he'd surprise us. And like a dope, I welcomed him in. I even handed him a beer. That night, I saw her look at him with a smile I hadn't seen in years. Not since before the mortgage, the colic, the daycare bills. And I told myself I was imagining things, because the alternative would have shattered me. Spoiler alert, I got shattered anyway. My daughter, Lily, was with us. 9 years old, with her mother's eyes but my stubborn chin. She asked me that morning, "Dad, why does Jake sleep on the couch but whisper to Mom like they're in a secret club?" That hit me harder than a gut punch. Kids see through lies the way dogs hear thunder before it rolls in. I told her Jake was just helping Mom with a work project. She blinked once and said, "He's a bad helper." Out of the mouths of babes, right? So there I was, standing in the doorway of the cabin's den, coffee still in hand, when I saw them. Not caught in the act, no, cheaters are rarely that clumsy. But close enough. Her fingers brushed his. He whispered something and she leaned into him. Intimacy, real intimacy, stolen right in front of me. And they didn't even flinch. Like I was the third wheel in my own damn life. The realization hit me like ice water to the soul. This wasn't new. This had been going on for months. Maybe longer. Jake wasn't just some workplace buddy. He was the man who thought he could walk into my house, my vacation, my family, and replace me. But here's the part they didn't count on, I wasn't about to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to throw a punch. No. I was going to smile, stay calm, and take everything that mattered, one piece at a time. Because revenge is best served cold, and I was about to become an expert in Arctic hospitality. The first thing I did was offer him another drink. Yep. Poured Jake a cold one and handed it to him like I hadn't just witnessed the emotional equivalent of a drive-by shooting. He thanked me like the smug, clueless clown he was, all dimples and frat boy charm. Clara gave me a weird look, her eyes trying to decode the calm on my face. Good. Let her wonder. She didn't know I just made a decision. Not a threat, not a tantrum. A strategy. We were leaving in 3 days, and those were going to be the longest 72 hours of her life. I had a plan, and it started with pretending everything was just fine. That night, I grilled steaks. Played Uno with Lily. Acted like the biggest fool in the cabin, all while taking mental snapshots of every glance, every whispered exchange, every too long touch. Let me tell you, the hardest part wasn't keeping my voice steady. It was keeping my daughter away from the emotional fallout. Because Clara might have forgotten she had a family, but I hadn't. Lily came first. Always. That night after she went to bed, I accidentally left my phone charging in the living room. And wouldn't you know it, Clara and Jake decided to whisper right there on the couch while I pretended to snore in the bedroom. Whispered long enough for my phone to pick it up, clear as day. "I wish we didn't have to hide anymore," she said. "Just a few more days," he replied, "he won't know what hit him." And that, folks, is what we call the jackpot. Audio gold. I sent it to a backup drive before the sun came up. The next morning, I made Clara coffee, asked her if she wanted to take Lily into town for some breakfast while I stayed back to clean up. She hesitated. Of course she did. But guilt makes people agreeable, and Jake offered to stay behind and help. Naturally. Perfect. I watched them drive off with Lily in the back seat, then turned to Jake with a grin so wide it hurt. "Wanna chop some firewood?" I asked. He followed me out back like an obedient golden retriever, and I let him swing the axe while I watched. And waited. After a while, I said, "So, you and Clara, huh?" He froze. Axe midair. The look on his face. Priceless. He tried to play dumb, but I shut it down. "Don't insult me, Jake. I'm not blind. I'm just patient." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Probably smart. I didn't yell. Didn't threaten. I just said, "You've got until tomorrow morning to get on a bus and vanish. If you don't, the audio clip of you two plotting your little affair goes straight to her parents, your job, and the school board. You work with kids, don't you?" That got his attention. He stammered something about not meaning for it to go this far. I raised an eyebrow. "You brought your duffel bag, Jake. You meant to stay. Now you'll leave. Or I'll make sure everyone knows who you are when you show up at the next PTA meeting." He said nothing. Just looked down at the axe like it might give him answers. Spoiler, it didn't. Later that day, Clara noticed he was quiet. Kept asking if he was okay. I sat back with my whiskey and watched her squirm. "Everything all right, honey?" I asked. She nodded too fast. Guilty people always do. That night, she tried to initiate. You know, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't carved out a little slice of betrayal and fed it to another man. I turned her down. Politely. Firmly. She gave me this wounded look, like I was the one breaking her heart. The irony nearly killed me. The next morning, Jake was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just a half-empty beer can and his scent lingering in the guest blanket. I pretended to be surprised. "Guess he had somewhere to be," I said. Clara looked spooked. Good. Let her sweat. We drove home in silence. Lily chatted in the back seat about mountains and chipmunks and hot chocolate, blissfully unaware of the adult carnage unraveling around her. I glanced in the rearview mirror at her and made another silent promise: no matter what happened next, she wouldn't grow up thinking this was normal. Cheating. Lying. Watching your parents pretend their world wasn't on fire. Not on my watch. I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Getting Jake out was just step one. Step two. Getting my daughter out of a marriage poisoned by betrayal, and making damn sure Clara knew exactly what she'd lost, forever. The second we got home, Clara snapped back into her usual routine like nothing happened. She unpacked our bags with the robotic efficiency of someone avoiding guilt like it's a contagious disease. I watched her pull out Lily's sweatshirt, fold it neatly, and place it on the dresser with this fake little smile on her face like she was June Cleaver and hadn't just torched our marriage. I said nothing. Not yet. She needed to think she was still in control. That evening she made pasta, her signature dish, which she only ever cooked when she felt guilty or wanted something. Probably both. She set the table with a glass of wine at my seat, lit a candle even, like ambience could erase infidelity. As we ate, she made small talk. About the trip, about Lily's school projects, about the new yoga instructor at her studio who was too intense but had great arms. I nodded, listening, memorizing every word. When Lily went to bed, Clara turned to me with that practiced tilt of her head and asked, "Are you mad at me about something?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I met her gaze and replied, "Why would I be?" She shrugged. "I don't know. You've been distant. And I noticed you were short with Jake before he left." I fought the urge to laugh. "Short with Jake? Lady, he's lucky I didn't bury him behind the cabin." I kept my tone light. "I just think he overstayed his welcome." She rolled her eyes with a scoff so sharp it could have sliced drywall. "Oh please. You're being dramatic. Jake was a guest, and you were acting like a jealous teenager." Jealous. She used that word like it was a dagger. And she didn't stop there. "Honestly, you should be thanking me. If I didn't invite people on that trip, we'd have spent the whole week in silence like we always do. At least Jake knows how to hold a conversation." That's when I realized she didn't just cheat, she was proud of it. She thought she'd improved the trip by dragging along her secret lover. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. She poured herself another glass of wine and stretched out on the couch like a queen after conquering a village. "You used to be fun," she said. "Now all you do is brood." I needed a break. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her unravel one narcissistic gem after another. "You needed a break from what? Being a wife? A mother?" She waved her hand, dismissive. "Don't get all righteous. You've been phoning it in for years. Jake actually listens. Jake compliments me. Jake makes me feel alive." And there it was. The confession. Served not with remorse, but with smug justification. She stood up, walked past me slowly, brushing my shoulder with deliberate arrogance. "If you had half the charm he does, maybe things would have been different." I turned, jaw tight. "So this is my fault now?" She stopped at the doorway, looking back with a smirk. "Everything is always someone else's fault with you, isn't it?" That was rich, coming from a woman who thought marital vows were optional depending on the weather. I stayed silent. She mistook it for weakness. "I'm going to bed," she announced, yawning like she'd just survived a long day of doing nothing useful. "If you want to pout, stay down here. But try not to wake me with your dramatic pacing like last time." She left without another word. And I stood there, still as stone, letting the weight of her words settle into something colder, something sharper. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I'd built and how she tried to burn it down. The marriage, the trust, the family, we weren't partners anymore. We were opponents. And only one of us was walking away with Lily. So the next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. A real one. The kind that specializes in family court and custody battles. Clara could keep her wine, her yoga, her flings with discount Don Juans. But she wasn't going to keep my daughter. That war had just begun. Jake came back 2 days later, like the cockroach he was, all jittery and pale, knocking on our front door like he'd forgotten he'd been thrown out of my life and told never to come within 100 feet of it again. Clara opened the door, wearing one of those silky robes she loved to flaunt around the house, pretending she was some kind of old Hollywood starlet instead of a bored housewife with a guilt complex. When she saw him, her expression shifted from smug surprise to narrowed suspicion. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, already glancing over her shoulder to see if I was within earshot. I was. Jake stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, hands stuffed into his jacket, sweat blooming at his collar. "He knows," he blurted. "Your husband. He knows everything." Her face froze. Not a blink. Not a breath. Then slowly, dangerously, she asked, "What do you mean, everything?" Jake looked down like a scolded intern. "He recorded us. That last night at the cabin. He heard it all. He threatened me. Said he'd ruin my job, my life. I had to leave town. She slapped her palm against the wall so hard it made Jake flinch. "Are you a complete idiot?" she growled. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you delete the audio? Or, I don't know, not confess like a guilty toddler asterisk." He shook his head. I panicked. "I thought maybe if I came back and warned you, we could figure something out. You said he was spineless. You said he wouldn't do anything." Clara's laugh was a bitter explosion of disbelief. "Well, clearly, I was wrong. Because now you've put me in a position where I have to go to war." And just like that, she pivoted. Not a second spent on regret, or shame, or wondering how to fix what she'd broken. No, Clara was a strategist, and Jake had just handed her a problem to solve. The problem was me. That night, she didn't bring it up at dinner. She smiled. She passed the salad. She asked Lily about art class and told me I should really start using coasters again because the coffee table was getting ruined. It was the calm before a hurricane, and I could smell it in the air. Sure enough, once Lily was in bed and the dishes were cleared, Clara crossed her arms and stood in front of the TV like she was giving a press conference. "We need to talk," she said, voice flat. I muted the show and met her eyes. "About?" She didn't flinch. "About the fact that you've been spying on me. Recording me. Manipulating my personal life like you're some kind of secret agent." I smiled, slowly. "You mean the part where you cheated on your husband in a cabin I paid for? That part?" Her jaw clenched. "Don't get righteous with me. You could have confronted me like a grown man. But no, you played games. And now Jake's lost his job. He's terrified." I leaned back in the chair, folding my hands behind my head. "Good. Terrified suits him. And he should have thought about that before crawling into my marriage." She scoffed. "Oh, spare me the victim act. You think you're so noble, sitting there pretending you're some wounded hero. You never fought for me. You never tried to make things better. Jake actually saw me." "He saw you?" I repeated. "He saw you while I was raising our daughter, working myself to exhaustion, and keeping this house running like a machine. You weren't unseen, Clara. You were just bored. And now you want to rewrite the story like I pushed you into another man's arms." She pointed a finger at me, shaking. "Don't you dare act like you're some perfect martyr. You withdrew years ago. You made me feel unwanted. You buried yourself in work and chores and bills. You stopped treating me like a woman." I stood up. "So your solution was betrayal? You think that's justified because I didn't light candles every week?" Her voice rose. "You emotionally abandoned me. Jake reminded me what it felt like to be alive." "Well, congratulations," I snapped. "Now you're alive, and alone." She flinched, but only for a second. Then her face hardened into something glacial. "I want custody," she said. "You're unstable. Vindictive. Spiteful. You manipulated a situation to emotionally blackmail me. That's not a good father." I laughed once, low and sharp. "You're coming after custody? After this? You brought your lover into our family vacation, snuck around under our child's nose, and you're standing there with the audacity to call me unfit?" She didn't blink. Courts don't care about hurt feelings. They care about who's the more rational parent. You've been collecting evidence. Fine. I'll collect mine. Let's see how a judge feels about your obsessive behavior, your anger, your, try it, I said, stepping closer. Try and twist the story. But remember this, Clara, you might be good at lying, but I'm better at remembering the truth. And I have a whole playlist of it on file. She stared at me, lips pressed tight, then turned and stormed upstairs. The war had begun. But unlike her, I wasn't fighting for ego or control. I was fighting for Lily. And I never lose when I fight for something that pure. The thing about Clara was, once she decided someone was the enemy, she didn't rest. She didn't mourn, reflect, or reconsider. She schemed. So when she realized she couldn't guilt me, couldn't shame me, and couldn't outmaneuver the truth I had in my back pocket, she switched tactics. The next week was eerily quiet, no more shouting matches, no door slamming. She walked around the house like a queen visiting foreign soil, too proud to engage in petty fights, but her eyes were always watching, calculating. Jake was back in the picture, but never physically in the house. He'd call instead, and she'd whisper in the bathroom or pace on the patio like some amateur spy. I let her play her games, never mentioning the obvious, because I already knew what she was up to. Clara wasn't just angry now, she was hunting. And Jake, the spineless opportunist that he was, offered to help. I overheard one of their hushed conversations. She was asking about my work hours, my daily routines, and even trying to twist old arguments into patterns of emotional instability. Jake encouraged her. "Start documenting," he said. "If we want to make a case, we need timestamps. If we can show he's neglectful, short-tempered, obsessive, it could work in court." And there it was. They were building a file on me. Me, the man who had held this house together like a crumbling bridge during a hurricane. But I didn't panic. Because while Clara was collecting fabrications and whispering into Jake's ear like a villain in a soap opera, I was doing something else. I was spending real time with Lily. We started going for walks every evening. Just the two of us. At first, she was quiet, always glancing at the house like she might get in trouble for talking too much. But slowly, she opened up. "Is Mom mad at you?" she asked one evening, kicking a pinecone down the sidewalk. "She's confused," I answered. "But it's not your job to fix it. That's on the grown-ups." She nodded, serious in a way no 9-year-old should ever have to be. "I like when it's just us. You listen better." That one nearly broke me. I ruffled her hair, swallowed the ache in my throat, and said, "You're the best thing in my life. Always remember that." We played board games after dinner. I taught her how to cook French toast on Sunday mornings. We built a birdhouse together for school. And every night, when she hugged me goodnight, it felt less like routine and more like trust being sewn together one thread at a time. Meanwhile, Clara grew bolder. She left legal pamphlets on the counter, by accident, met with a custody attorney and made sure I saw the appointment in her calendar. She even tried to provoke me into reacting. One night, she stood in the hallway and said, "If you cared more about your family and less about being right, maybe I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." I didn't respond. I just looked her dead in the eye and walked away. She hated that. A few days later, she brought up an incident from years ago, how I once yelled during a power outage when Lily was scared and I couldn't find the flashlight. "I'm just saying," she told Jake over the phone, not knowing I was down the hall, "there are patterns. He's always had a temper. If I record enough of these moments, the court will believe me." But she couldn't record what wasn't there. I didn't give her any ammunition. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just silence. Focus. Strategy. Because while Clara and Jake were trying to fabricate a storm, I was building a shelter. And Lily? She was already walking into it. She started drawing pictures again. One of them was of a house, 2 stick figures smiling, one with glasses and messy hair. The caption said, "Me and Daddy. No Mom. No Jake. Just us." I pinned it to the fridge. Clara saw it and said nothing. But her jaw twitched. That drawing said more than any lawyer ever could. I wasn't just winning, I was becoming undeniable. The courtroom wasn't what I expected. No slamming gavels, no explosive scenes like in the movies, just cold air, polished wood, and the low murmur of lawyers passing documents like secrets. Clara sat on the other side of the room in a fitted blazer and too much makeup, trying to look maternal, stable, professional. Jake wasn't there. He'd vanished again when things got serious, which was the most honest thing he'd done in months. She was alone now, just as she deserved to be. My lawyer, a calm woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper memory, laid everything out clearly. Evidence of Clara's infidelity. The audio recordings. The timing of Jake's visits. The half-hearted attempts to hide their relationship. The nights Clara left Lily alone to take calls in the car. The fact that her behavior changed right after Jake came into the picture, becoming erratic and hostile. But the moment everything shifted was when Lily was called in. She wore her best dress, the one she picked herself, and walked up to the stand with her shoulders back and her chin high like she understood the weight of it all. The judge leaned in, gentle but direct. "Lily, can you tell me who you prefer to live with?" She looked down for a second, then back up, her voice steady. "My dad. He listens to me. He doesn't yell. He doesn't lie. And I feel safe with him." Clara flinched like the words were bullets, but Lily wasn't done. "I love my mom, but when Jake was around, she was always mad at Dad, and she never played with me. Daddy reads to me every night. We go on walks. He helps me with my homework. He makes me laugh. I want to stay with him." Silence fell. Not dramatic. Just final. The judge nodded, thanked her, and Lily stepped down with the kind of quiet grace that no child should have to master. Clara sat frozen, blinking too fast, her mouth opening slightly like she might say something, but there was nothing left to say. The judge ruled before lunch. Full custody to me. Clara would get supervised visitation. The court cited emotional instability, the manipulative behavior in her attempts to manufacture evidence, and the strength of Lily's statement. Clara didn't look at me when we walked out. She didn't scream or throw one last insult. She just stood there, holding her purse like a lifeline, watching us walk away. I held Lily's hand as we stepped into the sunlight outside the courthouse. She looked up at me. "We're really going home?" I smiled, kneeling to her level. "We never left, kiddo. We just had to fight for it." She threw her arms around my neck, and for a moment, the noise of everything else disappeared. That night, we ordered pizza and watched her favorite movie on the couch. No tension. No secrets. Just the two of us, wrapped in a blanket of peace that had been earned one silent step at a time. I looked at her as she leaned on my shoulder, her breath steady, her eyes starting to close. I'd been broken once, betrayed and nearly dismantled. But I had chosen not to scream, not to fall, not to self-destruct. I'd chosen to fight smart. And now, sitting there in the warm light of a quiet home, I realized something. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's simply the sound of your child sleeping safely in the house that she chose.